Wonderful, wonderful Pacha people. Thank you so much for being with us. We are here, Bill Twist and I.
Hello, everybody.
And we are very, very happy to see so many of you for our very special time today. This Monday is with our partner, our beloved friend, our colleague, our brother, John Perkins, as you know. And we're going to begin, as we always do, with a sacred space opening, a meditation. So if you're not driving your car, and if you are, you should not be, you should be at home. Please lower your eyes or close your eyes, and we will begin. Drop into the sweet, countable territory of your breath. As we breathe together, appreciate that capacity to give and receive with the breath, that all of us can breathe, that the virus, though it's taking enormous toll on our brothers and sisters, for all of us here gathered, we can breathe. For the bias and prejudice and pain of the United States, for so many people of Black and brown people who can't fully breathe in their life. We hold them in our hearts. We acknowledge their pain and suffering. We open to that pain, that history, that wrongdoing, that oppression, whether the perpetrator or the perpetrated, all of us need to be free, the oppressor or the oppressed. And as you give and take with your breath, exchanging molecules with every living thing, every human being, every animal, every plant, acknowledge and celebrate the interconnected nature of all life and how we all face challenges, face hardship, and at the same time, feel the joy of being alive at an epic, historic, unprecedented time for the human family. How we will use this time, how we will make a difference with it, is yet to be seen. And in that inquiry, let's breathe together 3 times. And one deep breath together and out with a sigh. And open your eyes and behold the Pacha community. Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us today and for being with the 3 founders of the Pachamama Alliance, the 3 co-founders. John Perkins joins us today as a co-founder, but also as an author, as someone who's, as I think we all know who've read his books, any of them, but particularly the most recent one, Touching the Jaguar, as someone who's taken total responsibility and ownership for his past, as a human being who was on the dark side, didn't know he was on the dark side, but once he realized he was on the dark side, he stepped into the light, never hiding what he did, never putting it in wraps, but rather revealing what he did, taking responsibility for it, owning it, as he did the rest of his life, dedicated the rest of his life to transforming the world, and particularly the wrongs that he was part of. Something our country here in the United States has not yet done, something that is critical to moving forward. John is a living example of owning a dark past, taking responsibility for it and shape-shifting it, transforming it into the kind of future that we all stand for with the Pachamama Alliance. So it's so thrilling to always be with John, but particularly today on this call.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. So John was, when I first met John, I didn't realize he was on the dark side still. But our trip to the Amazon that Lynne and I were invited on, that John had coordinated, Lynne and John had coordinated, and if you've read the book, you'll see the story is told in there. But the reason the Pachamama Alliance is not just another environmental organization or an Amazon organization committed to working on protecting the Amazon or even on indigenous issues is because of what John brought to the discussion at the very beginning. And John had been, I'm not going to give a deep introduction of John and all the things he's done, other than he was in the business world for a number of years. And the book tells a really beautiful story about, as Lynne said, how he got deeply into the international business world and then came out of that. But even when he was deeply in the business world, he had a real commitment to this understanding that what the indigenous people needed and what the world needed to protect the Amazon was actually not work done down in the Amazon, but work done up in our part of the world. And John had been working with an organization he started even before Pachamama Alliance was founded. His organization was called Dream Change. And that was an organization that recognized that what we needed to do was change our perceptions. We needed to change the way we saw the world. And it's because of that John brought that vision to the Pachamama Alliance, that the Pachamama Alliance has as bold a vision, as bold a stand in the world as we do have. That our work is really to create an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just human presence on the planet. And that the work that we do is both supporting, partnering with indigenous people to protect the Amazon, and from the insights and the work we do there to change the dream of the modern world, to make the changes that really need to be made for us all to live in harmony on this planet. And that's, for me, we can attribute that to John. If Lynne and I had showed up down there with someone else, who knows, nothing would have happened, because we were with John, and John had this huge vision of what humanity really needs to do to protect our living earth and to honor each other. That's what John brought to this. So I'm really pleased for those of you who don't know him, to have a chance to meet him today. John has just written a new book called Touching the Jaguar. And this, as Lynne referenced, the situation we're in now is sort of a strange time for a new book to be coming out, except the fact that we're facing the pandemic and the racial injustice uprising that's going on. This book actually has a frame for how all of us can lead our lives that provides a response to these unusual circumstances that we're in now. So hopefully we'll hear some about that from John today. I want to start off with a question. What does touching the Jaguar mean, John? You named your book that. What does touching the Jaguar mean? Where does that come from?
Well, thanks, Bill. This is what it means. You have to Jaguar, little baby Jaguar here. Actually, she's an 8-week-old American kitty, but I'm always touching my Jaguars, it's like, so, and we may hear her crying because she loves to talk. She loves it when I'm on these shows. Anyway, thanks for that amazing introduction, Bill. And I just want to say, all of you guys just took the bull by the horns and turned this organization into this global this global movement that it's become, Pachamama Alliance. So I thank you. It's been a wonderful, wonderful working relationship with the two of you. And I just wish I were sitting in your house with you right now, although we might not have this little Jaguar with us because she probably wouldn't want to travel. She's very noisy. So touching the Jaguar, as probably a lot of the listeners here already know, a shaman saved my life deep in the Amazon rainforest back in 1969 when I was a Peace Corps volunteer there. And basically, he did this by helping me change my perception around the food and the spit beer, the chicha that I was drinking. And he said, touching the Jaguar means that we identify our fears, our barriers, whatever's standing in our way, our Jaguars, we identify them, and then we confront them. We don't run from them, we face them, we don't deny them. And once we do that, we change our perceptions about them. And with the changed perception, we take actions that will change our lives and ultimately the world. And I think the key here is this idea of changing perception, that we know that reality is molded by our perceptions. There's no countries, there's no United States, there's no Russia, there's no religion, there's no culture, there's nothing human, really, no human institutions except as we perceive them. And then when enough people accept a perception or codify it into law, it impacts reality. And, you know, I mean, one of the things I think that this coronavirus and all the demonstrations today around racial injustice and discrimination and social injustice has shown us is that we've created a perception that is all about maximizing short-term profits, what many economists call a death economy. And what we've done is we've really opened the door to an oligarchy. Our country today is in the throes of a struggle between democracy and oligarchy. And this is the third time the United States has gone through this. The first time was the American Revolution. The East India Company was an oligarchy that was controlling us along with the crown. We overcame it. And the second time was the Civil War, which we're hearing a lot about these days. So the South was an oligarchy, no question about it. Feudal society. And then the last time was really began in the 1880s and went up until the time of FDR, when the country was more and more being taken over by these powerful, powerful elites. And essentially the Great Depression and FDR's policies moved us beyond that. But we've entered it again. And we've entered it partly because we've bought into this idea that Milton Friedman so championed when he won the Nobel Prize in economics in 1976, so strongly championed that the only responsibility is to maximize short-term profits. And the only responsibility of us individuals is to maximize short-term consumer materialistic gains. But that's a perception. But it's taken us to this perception. If all your job as a CEO is to maximize short-term profits, then ultimately you embrace oligarchy, which is what's happened. So now we're seeing that we need to turn that perception around, that all of our serious problems, whether it's climate change, species extinction, social injustice, now the coronavirus, all of these things, they're all problems, but they're symptoms of the bigger problem, which is this death economy, an economic system that's dedicated to short-term maximization of profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. But it's just a perception. And once again, as we've done 3 other times in our history, we need to turn that perception around. You know, FDR is perhaps the greatest example where he really turned things around by bringing in the New Deal. He said, you know, to get out of this recession, to win the Second World War, we've got to perceive ourselves differently. We've got to all come together and perceive ourselves differently. And I think it's very important that during his sort of the last years in office, he reached out to union leaders around the country, and he had meetings with them. And as they left the meetings, he would say to them, you know, I think you now understand that I'm with you. I want to do what you want me to do, but you're going to have to go out and force the rank and file you're going to have to get the rank and file to force me to do what I want to do, because otherwise I can't get it through. And again, it's perception. how do we create a perception? We're at this amazing time. And the Pachamama Alliance is all about that, changing the dream, all of our programs, the whole idea that came out of the Jaguar people and all the Amazonian indigenous people that we work with. So they talk about changing the dream. By the dream, they mean perception. How do we change our perception? And to recognize that every one of the problems we deal with, we can't solve climate change unless we solve this perception that we have, and unless we get rid of the oligarchy. Back in the 60s, I recall how we passed all these laws, the civil rights laws, the Voter Rights Act, the Fairness of Housing Act, and so on. We thought we had solved the civil rights problem back then. What we didn't realize is that the civil rights problem was not the problem. It was a problem. But the problem was an ingrained system where the corporations were more and more taking over because they were defending oligarchy under this guise of maximizing short-term profits. And I think now we're finally realizing that we've got to go after the big problem. It's not enough to change laws around integration or around voter rights. We've got to move beyond that. I'm sorry, Bill, I took a long time answering that question.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So one of the things that most inspires me about you, John, and I remember there was this film made of the Economic Hitman book that you wrote, which was a huge, huge, huge bestseller, where you acknowledged your work as an economic hitman, and then the revelation you had that this was wrong and that you were forcing governments to do things that would ultimately hurt their people and hurt the natural world. And then you woke up and you revealed, you became like a investigative reporter, kind of revealing, taking the curtain down and showing how wrong all this was. And I remember seeing you speak. There's a film of you going back to Ecuador where you had done some things that you were not proud of, and doing a talk, and thousands of people filled the Cultura, the Cultura Manor place where you spoke, and you apologized. I remember you apologized, and someone could have killed you. They could have attacked you. They could have strung you up for what you had done that you acknowledged in building dams and roads and trying to get the government to do things that would ultimately benefit the United States. And I want to ask you, the life you've led since you woke up to that is so inspiring, because you've just dedicated yourself, as I said in the beginning, to rectifying that harm. And this book is all about that. And I see such a parallel to what's going on in the United States now, that we have not really reckoned with. We're just beginning, as a result of Black Lives Matter, just beginning to reckon with our past, just beginning to really say out loud in a more public and visible way, this country was built on genocide and slavery, really taking horrible, horrible, horrible advantage of our brothers and sisters. And that turnaround, do you see that it's possible for us now to have the kind of turnaround that your life is a demonstration of, an incredible example of? Do you think it's possible? Do you think that is some of what might be beginning to happen in the United States?
Well, yeah, thanks, Lynn. If I didn't think it was possible, I wouldn't be talking to you about this right now. I wouldn't have written the book. I think we're really being pushed. And I think, the shamans and so many prophecies, whether it's the eagle and the condor, or the prophecy of the Mayan prophecy of 2012, or the Himalayan prophecies, they've all said that at this point, we would enter this time with an opportunity to rise to higher consciousness. And I think that's what's happening at this point. We're really, really being pushed. And, for a number of years, an awful lot of people, including people in very high positions, have seen that we are on a trajectory, that we're living on a fragile space station, and we humans are the pilots, and we've been navigating her toward disaster. And they've been saying we need to reboot the navigation system. The problem is how do we do that? So, before the virus hit, before all the demonstrations around social inequality hit, there were B corporations were becoming more and more popular, benefit corporations, the Green New Deal, conscious capitalism, 192 of the world's most powerful executives coming together at the Business Roundtable last August, basically saying we've got to move from a death economy to a life economy that does everything Pachamama represents, regenerates destroyed environments, cleans up pollution, is socially responsible, creates new technologies that regenerate and so on. We've been moving in that trajectory, but there's always a backlash. The oligarchy sets in very strongly, It created the Revolutionary War. I mean, the East India Company was so determined to maintain their power, and the Confederacy was so determined to keep their power. And then we had the recession, the depression of the 30s and the war, and that put an end to that rise of oligarchy. But the forces are so strong to try to hold us back, and we need to take strength from that. And certainly this virus and the social unrest that's going on is really, really pushing us all to understand that this system just is not working, and that the United States has done an incredibly lousy job at leading the world from every standpoint, from a political standpoint, and certainly from a health standpoint at this point. But the one thing that's come out of all this is we're really seeing our shadow. And, a shadow is created when a light hits a solid form. The solid form is the death economy. And the shadow has hit it hard in the last few months. We've really seen that shadow. And some people are trying to deny that it's a shadow. And that, the status quo, the oligarchy is stepping in to say, no, that's not really a shadow. But we know it's a shadow. How do you get rid of a shadow? You shine a light. You move the light up higher and higher and higher. You raise consciousness. And when the light is finally directly over the solid object, showing it, completely exposing what the terrible thing a death economy is, how it's destroying life on this planet as we know it, how it's created awful inequality. Once you see that, the shadow goes away. And that's when we touch the Jaguar. That's when we say, all right, so it's time to change our perceptions. So, 1976, Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize by saying, in the Nobel Prize of Economics, by saying the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits. He said a lot of other things too, but that was probably the most significant statement. That turned everything around. But that proves that all you got to do is change that perception. So that's all we got to do. And then we got to take a lot of actions. I'm not suggesting that the actions that we take are going to be simple or easy. We've got to discipline ourselves. But the starting point is to say all of these problems come from exactly what Pachamama Alliance talks about, changing the dream. What you guys have devoted your life to, at least since I've known you, which is since the 90s, when we went into Ecuador together. I mean, it's happening. We've seen it happening around the world. You've seen it happening with the growth of the Pachamama Alliance in 97, 80, 87, 90, I don't know. We're in a lot of countries now. And it all came out of the indigenous people telling us that we have to change our dream. We have to change our perception. I am incredibly encouraged that we are moving forward in that direction. And we have to expect pushback. And when we get pushback, like a good martial artist, you don't try to overpower a guy who's a lot bigger and stronger than you. You have to turn that energy around. And that's how we're doing it. And we do it through perception, That's the way a good martial artist will work too. To give the big guy the perception that he can win by using his strength, whereas in fact you use your cleverness. You turn that perception around.
John, so the shift from a death economy to a life economy, what have you thought through, or what are the kinds of perceptions, or in what frames does a life economy start showing up then, or how do we what are the differences in how we hold ourselves or see ourselves in relation to the world for a life economy to mature and to evolve?
Well, first of all, we really look at what Pachamama Alliance's mission statement says, creating an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on the planet. That's a long-term goal. It's also a short-term goal, but it's really got the long term. And we apply that to business, and we support the businesses that are moving in that direction. And we need to understand, I've had so many high executives in big corporations say, I want to do the right thing. I want my company to be greener. I've got children, I've got grandchildren, and I want my company to be better. But I know if I lose 0.5% of market share, my main stockholders will fire me and replace me with someone who only cares about market share. So that's why organizations like Pachamama Alliance, getting out there, encouraging consumer campaigns. If every one of the people listening to this picks a corporation, I don't care whether it's Monsanto or Exxon, Chevron, or Nike or Walmart, pick a corporation that you want to see do better. And Lynn, as you've always said, be positive, don't make anybody the bad guy. Say, hey, I love your product, but I'm not going to buy it anymore until you pay your workers in India a fair wage, or clean up the pollution you've caused in the Amazon, Chevron, or whatever it is. And then get that out to all your social networking circles and ask them to send it to these companies. And so many executives have told me, once I get 100,000 of these, I'll go to my main stockholders and say, we got to listen to our customers. So I think we start by understanding, Lynn, and that's to your question, that understanding that we all have the power to do this. And the internet gives us more power than ever. And we're experiencing that through this virus too. And then beyond that, I think every one of us can ask a question like, what do I most want to do with the rest of my life? And incidentally, in Touching the Jaguar, I outline a daily practice where we can actually go into this. But what do I want to do with the rest of my life? What will bring me the greatest satisfaction? As a writer, I'd say I want to write. But a friend of mine who's a carpenter says, I want to work with my hands and wood. That's almost the opposite end of the spectrum. And there's everything in between. And the next question is, how do I relate that to the larger world? Because we're all happier if we help other people. So a writer, I would say, I tell stories that will help people transform their lives and the world, make them better. And the carpenter would say, I'm going to use sustainable materials to make a better world. And then we've got to confront what's stopping us. What's holding us back? I identify what's holding us back. So for the writer, it might be, I don't have enough time in the day to write. And the carpenter might say, my clients don't want to pay more for sustainable materials. So then the fourth question is, what happens when we touch that Jaguar? How do our perceptions change? The writer says, well, I can get up half an hour earlier in the morning, right? Or I can watch an hour less of television at night and write. And the carpenter says, when he touches that Jaguar, he tells his clients, little extra price in sustainable materials is not a cost. It's an investment in the future for yourself and your children. And then the fifth question, what actions do I take? And the writer writes, the carpenter makes the cabinet with sustainable materials and tells the kids, hey, your parents just invested in your future. And I think everybody can do that. And then again, we can all come together to change the collective dream of the corporate world, of the materialistic world, that it's not about living in bigger houses. It's not about, I don't have to have this shirt because it's the only way I'm going to get somebody to love me or whatever. So, there's the collective, what we can all do in that way, but then each one of us can apply our own personal goals, our own personal satisfaction to this process. It's a wonderful time to be alive. We get to have the opportunity to participate in this fourth big revolution that America is going through, and in fact, the world's going through at this point. The whole world is with us on this one.
So in that, the Jaguar then is the personal hurdle that one either fears and avoids, or that's standing right in front of them, preventing them to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And in the images of, I think when you first started talking about this, it comes from indigenous recognizing that in visions or vision quests, you may approach something that that there's a lot of fear around, and usually it's a Jaguar, or a Jaguar creates a lot of fear, and the instruction was to go to that, to touch it. So actually, how does why don't you talk a little bit about your training with indigenous, your training with indigenous people even before we met. You were doing work with indigenous people that had really shaped your vision of what was possible in the world. Can you talk a little bit about that history, or
Yeah.
how you saw it touch the Jaguar from that?
Yeah. So the beginning was when I was a Peace Corps volunteer deep in the Amazon with the Shuar. At that time, our Shuar friends were officially uncontacted. They were neighbors to the Shuar, and they were enemies at the time. That's another story we can get into. But, so I'm living with the Shuar, and I get very sick. I couldn't keep any food down. I was dying. It was a 3-day terrible journey through jungles and all kinds of awful roads to the nearest medical facility. I couldn't even stand up on my own. So that night, a Shuar shaman healed me. And basically what happened was he took me on a vision quest, a shamanic journey. I had my eyes closed, and he says, and I see this amorphous shape in front of me. And the shaman says, touch the Jaguar. My God, I look all around like, I'm in the forest this night, like, where's the Jaguar? And he says, no, close your eyes and see the Jaguar and touch it. So I close my eyes, and this Jaguar is there, and it shapeshifts into, this amorphous form is there. It shapeshifts into a Jaguar, and I hear the voice of I think my mother, saying, the food and drink will kill you. And I'm realizing I'm eating some very strange foods. As you guys know, in the jungle, delicacy is squirming white grubs. And you don't drink river water because it's got too much organic matter, and they know you can't drink it. So the women make a kind of beer called chicha that a lot of our listeners have had, which is spit beer. They chew the manioc root, spit it. It becomes an alcohol, and then you can mix water with it. So I'm drinking a lot of spit beer because you got to rehydrate, and eating a lot of squirming white grubs because there weren't any Cliff Bars. And I hear this voice saying it'll kill you. At the same time, I see how incredibly healthy the Shuar, robust, strong people who live to be very old if they don't die in a hunting accident or something. And so I saw that night that the food and drink weren't killing me. It was my perception. And this voice, a voice. And we all have these voices that say, hey, you don't have enough education to do this. You haven't written enough books to do this. You haven't done enough carpentry to do this, whatever it is, these voices. And anyway, that night I learned that, and the shaman then required that I become his apprentice. 1969, there was no future in shamanism. I graduated from business school. The last thing in the world I wanted to do was become a shaman's apprentice, but he saved my life. So I did, and I went through this process, and then with other shamans in Indonesia and Iran and Egypt and many other places that I studied with, everywhere I discovered that the whole process of shamanism is about changing reality by changing our perceptions. And then I began to understand that's the basis of modern psychotherapy, of quantum physics, of business. Marketing, advertising is all about changing our perceptions to change the reality of what we buy. And everything is about that. And so this idea that the shamans have, and they started talking about, you got to change the dream of the modern world. And if we look at when the Pachamama Alliance was being formed, these tribes, now known as nations, recognized as nations, the Achwa, the Shuar, the Quechua, the Sapara, the Warani, they were all fighting each other over territory. They're hunters and gatherers. They got to protect their hunting and territory. And then Texaco came in the late 1960s, and suddenly they realized that their neighbors weren't their enemies anymore. They changed that perception. For thousands of years, their neighbors had been their enemies. Now they said, no, it's Texaco's the enemy. We got to come together, and they did, and they formed federations, and Pachamama Alliance ultimately played a large role in that. And then they understood that Texaco wasn't really the problem. Just like today, we've got to realize that climate change is a problem, but it's not the problem. Texaco was a problem, but the real problem was the dream of the world, the perception of the world that required oil. And that's when they came to us. They invited me to sit and listen to them plead with me to form an alliance with the people they feared. You. Us. And that's when you then put together an amazing group of people, Lynn, and included Bill, and we went back in and met with them, and out of that grew the Pachamama Alliance. And so this whole thing is all about perception. And now we're at a time in history when the United States is being so hard pressed to change its perception. And we're having this classic battle between those who say, let's protect ourselves from the virus, let's social distance and wear masks, and those that say, no, 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 we got to get back to short-term economic growth. We got to get back to short-term economic growth. You know, how many other countries are saying that? Well, but Brazil is, but not many others are. And they're doing a lot better than we are because they're looking at the long term. And this is an amazing lesson for all of us and for our businesses to understand that they can't just focus on this short-term thing, because we're just going to get sick again one way or another. Amazing time.
It is. It is. And in this amazing time, one of the things that I know you are very skilled at, and we've learned this also from our Indigenous partners, is the power of dreaming, the power of dreaming at night, but the power of also visioning and generating the future that you want. And for many people, I mean, I'm one of them, I didn't really pay any attention to my dreams. I knew there were a lot of people who did that, but that kind of wasn't my thing until, of course, I met you and we were in Guatemala and I had a vision that changed my life, which ended up enrolling me to go with you to the Amazon. But is there some way that we as a conscious group of people on this phone call can use our capacity to dream? Can we dream ourselves into a new future? And I know you've got in your book, you actually have this wonderful, questions we can ask each day and things we can really use as prompts to create the world that we're looking for and to live consistent with that. But could you say a little something about that, about dreaming, visioning, and creating this world, and how what power that has? Because in your life, it certainly has been proven over and over and over again that has power.
Yes. Yeah. So I had a dream that came out of business school and my own background, that I wanted to be wealthy and powerful and make a lot of money and be successful. And I became chief economist. I became an economic hitman. I realized that dream. And then I began to see that dream was a nightmare. Yes, I was doing all that, and I was living on Valium and alcohol, and then the next morning, lots of coffee. I wasn't happy. And so then I had to address, well, what is my real dream here? And my real dream was about, and it always had been as a kid, being a writer. That dream had been badly warped for me because in high school I had been a good writer, editor of the newspaper, winner of a short story award. Then I went to college, and I had a very famous writer as an English professor. I majored in English, and he hated my writing.
No.
I never got anything above a C. It devastated me. I quit college primarily because of that. And when I went back to college, I didn't study English. I went into economics and business administration. I didn't want to write anything. I was hurt so much. And then years later, after I went through and got out of being an economic hitman, I decided I needed to expose that world. I needed to write about it. I said, yeah, but I'm not a writer. My college professor said I can't write. And then I started thinking about him, and I thought, well, he's just an individual. And then I remembered that he didn't like Bob Dylan's writing. Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And so suddenly my whole perception changed. I touched that Jaguar, I went on, I touched that professor. And when I touched him, it was like he kind of faded, he fell apart. He's just a person who doesn't like Bob Dylan's writing. So maybe I'm as good as Bob Dylan, And I think we can all go through that process in our own ways. And yes, in the book, I propose this thing we can do every day for less than 10 minutes, or we can do it once a week, but everybody out there, and we can all take different paths. So, I go back to the first time what became the United States fought the oligarchy, the British, the East India Company and the British Empire. And, I've always thought, thank goodness George Washington didn't try to write pamphlets. He was a lousy writer, really. Thank God Tom Paine didn't try to lead armies. And thank God Martha Washington didn't do either of those things. Paine wrote pamphlets. Washington led armies, and Martha Washington organized women to make clothes and bullets and things for the men at the front. But they all took different routes, and we can all take different routes. With the carpenter, the plumber, the teacher, the parent, everybody, we can all take different routes. But like they all had the same dream, and that was getting out from under the British and the East India Company oligarchy. And they all took a different route, but they headed for the same. They had the same dream, and they got there. And so today we can all take these different routes and we can explore our own personal routes, but let's all head for the same dream. And that's getting out from under this oligarchy, the death economy, creating, according to the Pachamama Alliance, an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet. And we can all take our own individual paths, and we can come together at times to support the Pachamama Alliance, to write, to send out, social networking messages to corporate leaders to encourage them to move in the right direction. And we can all, we have to have that same dream that we want to create a better world for ourselves and our children, for everybody, and for all of nature, for all the jaguars, the real jaguars out there, for all of nature. And when we all come together and we have that same dream, we take our individual paths, we get there. We get there. And that's where we're headed now. I'm totally confident that that's where we're headed. And it's such an exciting adventure to be on.
Mm-hmm. I love what you're talking about, us all having the same dream. And I think the dream that we're all starting to gravitate towards, there is more of a common dream now, because it feels like we do recognize, there's an oligarchy, but there's also, we need to get rid of that, but we need to reestablish our relationship with nature. We need to reestablish and restore the natural world, the health of the environment, the health of our own human health. Is all up now, and the vision I think that people are gravitating to is a vision that includes all of that. That it's no longer subsets. Well, people can work just on protecting the environment, or some people can work just on economic issues or racial justice issues or othering issues in the human family. It's kind of all feels like we're seeing how it's all pointing us at a single outcome that we're here for, that we're all working towards now, and it feels like it's coming into focus more, that it is this world that works for everyone, and that's what we're all here for. And the carpenter does his work to create that, and the writer does their work to create that. It feels like a very hopeful time. And I loved in your book when you did have you had like the five steps to hone your vision and get into action. And I thought that was a really important part of the book, and would encourage anybody who wants to be part of this movement to build the world that we need to get to use the book for that. And is there anything more you want to say about those?
Can you say the
those
five steps?
Things?
Yeah.
5 steps again. Yeah. Well, one, you ask yourself, what is it I most want to do for the rest of my life? What will give me the greatest satisfaction? When I'm lying on that proverbial deathbed, what will I be proudest of? Or what will I wish I had done that I didn't do? Now do it. Second question is, how does that tie in with the bigger world? How does that help somebody else? One other person or the whole world? What can I do? Because that'll make me always makes us happier. Third question is, what's stopping me? What are my jaguars? What are my fears? What's holding me back? Whose voices am I hearing there saying you can't do it? And the fourth question is, when I touch those jaguars, when I confront those barriers, how does that change my perception? How does that turn things around so I have a new perception? I realized that English professor, he didn't know what he was talking about, And then the fifth question is, what action do I take today? And the action can be as small as sending a tweet, or it can be as big as running for president of the United States. I think one of you should run, incidentally. I think that would be a great.
You're talking to all those people who are out there watching right
yes, exactly. Exactly. And Bill, I just wanted to say, and Lynn too, but Bill, you played a very big role in helping Ecuador be the first nation in the world. Pachamama Alliance was behind it, but you personally were there. Be the first nation in the world to have a constitution that recognized the inalienable rights of nature. So, that was a huge, huge event, and it's impacted a lot of other countries. And now I think we in the United States are at a time similar to that when we're going through that. I know, and part of the Pachamama Alliance has always been around getting corporations out of the elections and working on climate change. And those are all contributing to that. So I think we are at this amazing time where what you mentioned earlier, both of you, that this book has come out at a really good time. It's perfect for these times. I didn't know there was going to be a coronavirus, but I did know that we were facing once in 100-year events every year or so, hurricanes, fires, etc. And it is a perfect time for the book. It's also the perfect time for the Pachamama Alliance, because our whole, we built up to this point to really understanding, you guys have built up to this point, really understanding the importance of changing perception and coming up with ways to make that happen. And so I think this is, it's a remarkable time for all of us and for all the people here who are supporters of the Pachamama Alliance. This is an amazing time for all of us to come together, to do our individual thing, but also to all come together to realize that we've got to change the perception, the dream of the modern world. That is behind everything else. And as Bill said, some of you can focus on climate change, some on corporate financing of elections, but to realize that there's a big umbrella problem over all of that we've all got to also look at, and that is turning around this death economy, this system that supports an oligarchy that's based on short term, and to realize that for the 250,000 or so years we've been human beings, almost all of that time we've had life economies like indigenous people have. It's only been in the most recent blink of an eye historically that we've moved in the direction of this materialistic, greedy approach to things. So what a great time for all of us to be here, to come together and to be working toward the beautiful, beautiful goal of creating a new world, truly a new world.
Yeah. I always want to make sure everybody's heard at least your short version. Let's see how much time we have, of the eagle and the condor prophecy, because it's so hopeful. And I feel like you're a carrier of that. And that's one of your great privileges and responsibilities, to frame the times we're living in from that prophecy. Could you share that?
Sure. And it is the little longer version is in the book, but the short version is back several thousand years ago, oral history. We don't know how long ago this goes back, but we know way back then, there was this prophecy that came out of the Amazon and the Andes and spread. And it was said back then, they said, back in the mists of history, human societies would decide to take two different courses, two different flights. One would be the flight of the eagle, which it was said would be the flight of, let's say, science, rationality, industry. And the other would be the flight, the brain, the mind. And the other would be the flight of the condor, which would be the flight of the heart, of intuition, of emotion, of creativity. And the two would go in very different directions for thousands of years. But it was said that in the fourth Pachacuti, in Quechua, the language of the Andes, a Pachacuti is a 500-year interval. The fourth Pachacuti occurred in about the year 1500 by our calendar. That at that time, the eagle and the condor peoples of the world for the first time would really come together, and they would clash. And the eagle peoples would practically drive the condor people into extinction, but not quite. And we know that's what happened. Columbus, the colonialization of the world by the industrialized people, practically drove the indigenous people into extinction, but not quite. And then the prophecy goes on to say that in the fifth Pachacuti, 500 years later, approximately the year 2000, the opportunity would arise for the eagle and the condor to fly together and as one, to dance, to mate, and to create an offspring which would be higher consciousness. And of course, we've been seeing that beginning, in the 90s, when you guys went to the Amazon, we founded Pachamama Alliance. People began to have an interest all over the eagle world, United States, Europe, and et cetera, of shamanism. And the shamans came out of hiding. They asked us to come be with them, to learn from them. In South America first, it took a little longer. In North America, it's still kind of happening here. But so we've been experiencing this change, and it isn't something that happens in one day or 1 year. It happens over a period of time. But we've really seen this prophecy being realized. It's manifesting itself now. And I think what we're going through right now, this worldwide clash, this worldwide terrible experience we're having with the virus and with discrimination. But it's forcing us. It's really, really forcing us to bring our minds and our hearts together, to bring the scientific together with the intuitive. And the intuitive, the shaman will tell us, Gaia, living earth, is speaking to us. You know, the hurricanes are happening. And the science will tell us, yeah, the hurricanes are happening because of industry. And we're seeing that when industry calms down, things come back to life. People can see stars in places they never saw them before. And so we really are seeing how that's bringing the eagle and the condor together. The prophecy is being realized, and it's such an amazing time to be alive. I used to think when I was a kid, I loved the stories of the American Revolution. I used to think I'd love to be better alive then to experience that. This is bigger because this is global. This is a bigger revolution. It's a consciousness revolution, and it's a lot more comfortable. We can sit in our homes and talk like this. We don't have to ride horses for 5 or 6 days to get together. Place and we've got running water. So, but this is a huge global revolution. Consciousness is rising among people all over the world. We are truly in a phase of huge evolution, which is what the eagle and the condor prophecy prophesizes, as do many other prophecies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, John, I love that. I love the prophecy and the coming together of the head and the heart. When we look at what's going on right now, it's amazing for me, some of the perceptions that are changing, like this, there's a legitimate discussion going on now around reparations for people who were enslaved, and reparations for indigenous people whose lands were stolen. And 10 years ago, even 5 years ago maybe, but certainly in the last 10 or 20 years, that discussion wasn't even on the table. Actually, for the US to cut back, to really look at its militarism is something that's on the table too. And in a way that with legitimacy now. And so there's some huge new possibility showing up. And I'm just inspired by, so how do we keep those perceptions, how do we keep opening those perceptions up? And what do we do to have those go into action? I guess it's maybe your 5 steps. This is what we all ought to be doing. But recognizing how big the possibility is now is just, it's staggering. Yeah.
Well, and I have a newsletter coming out tomorrow that people can get if they go to my website that addresses this. It's about taxes and police and military. And I think I prefer that we look at taxes as investments. And do you want to invest in the biggest military in the world that's bigger than the next 10 countries combined? Or do you, and doesn't care much about its healthcare system? Or do you want to invest in have your taxes go to paying for better healthcare systems and better equality for people, better housing and for homeless people and so on and so forth? That's really an issue here. How do we do that? And, you know, one of the things, these other times that we've gone through oligarchy, it's always been about taxes. So the revolution, taxation without representation. And the Americans were very incensed that the taxes were dropped on the East India Company and increased for all the local businesses. The Confederate War, the Confederacy had a lot, it was about not being taxed. And during World War II, big corporations contributed like 30% to our budget. And the tax rate on the wealthy was 90%. And, Reagan really dropped that. It's way down to like nothing for some people today. 60 of the 100 biggest companies in the United States paid no taxes last year and even get rebates. So I think this virus again, And all that's going on has pushed us to budgetary reform. Everybody's broke. All the cities are broke. The government's broke. It's huge debts. How do we get out of that? We tax the rich. And we tax corporations that benefit hugely from all the social services, education, healthcare, police and fire, and so on and so forth. They benefit, but they don't pay for them. And so we're at the time again where I think we really, really need to look at that. And reparations for people who've been terribly exploited and abused, to your point, Bill, that's incredibly important. We need to do that. And doing it not just because we guilty, we need to pay them up, but in recognition that they are the true protectors. They are our teachers. They know how to take care of the earth. They know how to dream a new reality. They know about perception. They've been teaching us this. And so, and it's a given fact that where indigenous people live their traditional lives, they take care of the environment. They're guardians. So I think that looking at reparations is not just, reparations maybe not the right word, it's investing or reinvesting or whatever in the people who we know can be our true guides, our leaders, our spiritual leaders and our environmental leaders. And they can teach us how to move into this life economy that we need to. They can help teach us. There's a lot of people who can teach us, but that's part of it. So let's invest in them. Let's help them get their land back, their lives back, and encourage them to continue teaching us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Well, this has been just fantastic and fascinating, and we've come to the end of our hour with you. And John, to say thank you is so inadequate for what you've done for this world and what you are doing, what you've done for us at Pachamama Alliance, and the strength of your vision, your commitment, your courage, your incredible courage, and your consciousness. And I'll just say briefly that for next week, at this same time, Reverend Deborah Johnson, will be responding to questions. It'll be a community conversation about justice and racism. And for those of you who know Reverend Deborah Johnson, she's a master at really dealing with the situation we're in right now in the United States and the history of it and where we want to go from here. But finally, John, bless you. And everybody go out and buy the Touching the Jaguar. You don't need to go out and buy it. You can order it online. Touching the Jaguar. It's a fantastic book. You almost can't believe that it's real. It's so
like you and Trump.
Gripping. You can't stop reading it or listening to it online. It's not John's voice, but it's a very competent voice. And it's a spectacular book, and it's really about you. It's about you. It's about me. It's about, and I don't mean just personally, it is about the Pachamama Alliance, but it's really about who you are, all of you. So thank you, and bless you, John. And what a gift to be your partner in this work.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
And then, as you know, the opening chapter is you. And the closing chapter is also the Pachamama Alliance, and it runs throughout the whole thing. So thank you. I mean, that book would not exist if it weren't for you guys. So thank you guys so much, and everybody who's listening. And I think the baby Jaguar here, she's been purring. She's been pretty good, but she wants to say
she wants to say bye. Bye. And please say goodbye in the chat. Any comments you want to express or love for John and his amazing work and his creation. The Pachamama Alliance is very much, all of us are in your debt, John. Thank you so much. So chat away, everybody. The chat is open for goodbyes and thank yous.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Hey guys. Bye-bye.